Commander Velthar's katana's fingers drummed against the metal table as he studied the human sitting across from him. The detention facility on Hegemony Station 7 hummed with the constant noise of air recyclers and distant spacecraft engines. Through the reinforced viewport, he could see the wreckage of human destroyers floating like broken toys against the starfield. The human looked so fragile. Lee Mira was her name, barely reaching his shoulder even when standing. Her brown eyes held a weariness that seemed too deep for someone so young. The standard gray detention uniform hung loose on her small frame, making her appear even more insignificant. Yet something about her unsettled him in ways he couldn't explain. Velthar had fought humans for 3 brutal years across 12 star systems. He'd seen their ships burn, watched their colonies fall, counted their dead by the thousands. They were supposed to be just another species that had overreached, another civilization that needed to learn its place in the galaxy. The Hegemony had conquered 47 worlds before encountering humanity. This should have been number 48. Logistics Coordinator, he read from the digital file hovering above his wrist display. New Busan Colony. Captured during the evacuation of civilian transports. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he processed the information. No military training, no combat experience. Yet you were found with military personnel. Mira shifted slightly in her restraints. The energy, bonds humming softly around her wrists. I helped coordinate supply runs to the outer settlements. Food, medicine, building materials, nothing exciting. The commander's mandibles clicked in what passed for skepticism among his people. The Galactic War Crimes Tribunal has evidence of systematic human brutality, mass executions of prisoners, biological weapons, torture of captured personnel. He activated the recording device, its red light casting strange shadows on the walls. You will provide testimony about these activities. For the first time since entering the room, Mira truly looked at him. Her gaze was steady, unflinching, and somehow more terrifying than any weapon he'd faced in combat. War crimes, she repeated softly. Commander, in all your years of conquest, have you ever been desperate? Really, truly desperate? The question caught him off guard. Desperation is weakness. The Hegemony teaches discipline, order, rational thought. That's your problem right there. Mira leaned back as much as her restraints allowed. You think desperation makes us weak, but desperation is when humans become most dangerous. It's when we stop being civilized and remember what we really are. Outside the viewport, a Hegemony cruiser glided past, its sleek hull bristling with weapons. Velthar had served on ships like that. It felt the satisfaction of overwhelming firepower reducing enemy positions to glowing craters. War was supposed to be about superior technology, better tactics, stronger forces. It was mathematical, predictable. Your people fought bravely, he conceded. But bravery without logic leads to defeat. Your casualties were 10 times ours in every major engagement. Mira's laugh was bitter. Casualties. You count bodies like inventory, don't you? Ships destroyed, personnel eliminated, objectives secured. Very neat, very organized. She met his gaze again. But you never understood what you were really fighting. The commander's secondary arms twitched with irritation. I fought humans. I destroyed human ships. I conquered human worlds. No, Mira said quietly. You fought our military. You destroyed our equipment. You took our territory. But you never fought us. The real us. It's the part that doesn't show up in your tactical analyses or casualty reports. A transport ship rumbled past the station, carrying more human prisoners to processing centers throughout Hegemony space. Veltor watched it for a moment, remembering the early days of the war when human resistance had seemed so straightforward. Their ships were smaller, their weapons less advanced, their tactics predictable. Victory had seemed inevitable. The tribunal requires specific documentation, he said, refocusing on the interrogation. Instances of human forces violating the conventions of war. Treatment of prisoners, use of forbidden weapons, targeting of civilian populations. Mira was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that made the commander's skin crawl. You want to know about war crimes? About what happens when you push humans past their breaking point? She looked directly at him. Then you should hear about Outpost Gamma, about Captain Park Jin-ho, and what 30 human soldiers did when your second fleet arrived in the Kepler system. Velthar felt his breathing quicken. Something in her tone suggested this wasn't going to be another tale of heroic last stands or noble sacrifices. This was something different, something that had changed the nature of their war. The attack. On Outpost Gamma was a routine pacification mission, he said, consulting his files. Minimal resistance expected. Standard surrender protocols followed. Mira's smile was sad and terrible. Standard protocols. Yes, that's what your commanders thought too. They expected us to follow the rules, to be reasonable, to accept defeat gracefully when the odds were impossible. She paused. They learned something about humanity that day. Something that should have made them run back to hegemony space and never return. The recording device hummed steadily, capturing every word. Velthair leaned forward, suddenly certain that whatever he was about to hear would change everything. He thought he knew about this war. But Park Jin-ho was just a mining foreman before the war, Mira continued, her voice carrying across the humming detention chamber. He knew every rock formation on Gamma Station, every tunnel the miners had carved over 15 years. When your second fleet dropped out of hyperspace, he had maybe 6 hours before your landing craft reached the surface. Velthor's claws tapped. The table impatiently. 2,000 hegemony shock troops against 30 humans and untrained civilians. The outcome was mathematically certain. That's what Colonel Zethmer thought too. Mira's eyes grew distant. Your forces came down in perfect formation, dropships screaming through the atmosphere like silver daggers. Park watched them land. From the observation deck of the mining complex, he counted every ship, every soldier stepping onto his world. The commander could picture it clearly. Standard planetary assault protocol. Overwhelming force, rapid deployment, immediate surrender. Demand. It had worked on 47 worlds before this one. Park gathered everyone in the main assembly hall, Mira said. 133 people total. It's miners, engineers, teachers, children barely old enough to walk. He stood on that platform where they used to hold safety meetings and told them the truth. Your fleet could turn the entire station into molten slag from orbit if they wanted. But they wouldn't, because they needed the mining facilities intact. Velthar nodded. The rare minerals extracted from Gamma Station powered half the hegemony's advanced technology. Destroying it would have been wasteful. So Park gave them a choice, Mira continued. Surrender and hope for mercy, or make you regret ever finding their little corner of space. She paused. Every single person voted to fight, even the children. Recording device hummed as Mira described what happened next. While hegemony forces surrounded the complex expecting standard surrender protocols, Park's people were already moving. The mining station had been built into an asteroid, its tunnels running deep into solid rock. Over 15 years, the miners had carved out a maze of passages, some so narrow only humans could squeeze through. Your soldiers landed expecting to find frightened civilians huddled in the main buildings, Mira said. Instead, they found empty corridors and maintenance robots rolling toward them with mining charges strapped to their backs. Velthar's mandibles clicked in recognition. Remembered the reports from Gamma Station. Equipment malfunctions, they'd called them. Communication disruptions. Minor setbacks in an otherwise routine operation. The first day was just probing, Mira explained. Park's people watched your patrols, learned your routines, figured out your blind spots. They turned the station's own systems against you. Units became flamethrowers. Water recyclers pumped toxic gases through the ventilation. Gravity generators failed in specific sections, sending your soldiers floating helplessly while humans crawled through maintenance shafts above them. The commander shifted uncomfortably. Standard military doctrine didn't account for enemies who turned an entire environment into a weapon. By day 3, your troops were afraid to enter certain sections of the station, Mira said. They'd lost contact with 2 full squads. Not killed, just ... gone. Vanished into tunnels too small for hegemony armor. Your soldiers started hearing things in the walls, scratching sounds, whispers in languages they couldn't understand. Belthar remembered Colonel Zethmar's requests for additional support. Increased communication interference, the reports had claimed.
Ouch.
Terrain difficulties? Nothing that suggested 30 humans were making fools of the hegemony's finest troops. The children were the worst part, Mira said softly. Not because they fought, but because they sang. Every night their voices would drift through the air. Recycling systems, lullabies their mothers had taught them, songs about home and safety and better days coming. Your soldiers thought it was psychological warfare. The commander leaned forward. It wasn't. Those kids were terrified, Mira replied. Hiding in tunnels barely wide enough for their small bodies, eating emergency rations, sleeping on bare rock. The singing helped them cope with the fear, but your troops didn't know that. They just heard ghost voices in the darkness. Children who should have been safely evacuated but were somehow still there, still defiant. She described how the siege developed into something unprecedented in hegemony military history. Park's forces had turned the mining station into a three-dimensional battlefield where normal tactics meant nothing. Atmospheric processors designed to maintain breathable air were reconfigured to create poisonous fog in specific corridors. Industrial fabricators meant for mining equipment started producing crude but effective weapons. Even the asteroid's rotation was manipulated to create shifting gravity fields that confused hegemony navigation systems. Your soldiers started requesting transfers, Mira said. Elite shock troops who had conquered entire worlds were asking to be reassigned rather than patrol those tunnels. They'd rather face human battlecruisers in open space than crawl through passages where every shadow might hide an enemy. By day 15, Colonel Zethmar was filing reports that made no tactical sense, requesting orbital bombardment of his own positions, demanding additional psychological evaluation units for his troops, suggesting that Gamma Station be declared a total loss and abandoned. Day 20 brought the breakthrough your forces were waiting for, Mira continued. They finally cornered a group of civilians in Section 7, 12 people, including 3 children. Your troops thought they'd finally scored a victory. Belthar waited, sensing this wasn't the triumph it seemed. The civilians surrendered. Peacefully, Mira said. Hands up, no weapons, exactly what your protocols demanded. Your soldiers were so relieved to have prisoners instead of ghosts that they didn't notice the mining charges. Park's people had spent 2 weeks placing throughout that entire section. The commander's breathing quickened. The explosion was detected. Across 3 star systems, Section 7 took out 43 hegemony soldiers, Mira confirmed. The 12 civilians died too, of course, but they'd volunteered, knowing exactly what would happen. That's when your colonel realized he wasn't fighting a normal resistance. He was fighting people who would sacrifice everything, even their own lives, to make you pay for every meter of ground. By day 25, reinforcements were arriving at Gamma Station. Not because the hegemony was winning, but because they were losing to an enemy that shouldn't have been able to fight at all. The door hissed open, and Dr. Kim Tai-ho shuffled into the interrogation chamber. His wrists bound by energy shackles that pulsed with soft blue light. Unlike the previous prisoners, he moved with careful precision, his eyes already cataloging every detail of the room. Belthar noticed how the human's gaze lingered on his gill slits, studying the rhythmic opening. And closing that allowed him to breathe. Sit, Belthar commanded, gesturing to the metal chair across from him. Tai-ho complied. But even restrained, there was something unsettling about his calm demeanor. His medical coat had been replaced with standard detention clothing, but he still carried himself like a doctor making rounds. The commander had specifically requested this prisoner after reviewing his file. A field medic who had treated wounded from both sides during the siege of the Kepler system. Your service record shows acts of mercy, Belthar began, consulting. His holographic display, hegemony soldiers treated alongside human casualties. Medical supplies shared with enemy wounded. This suggests your species has capacity for honor. Tai-ho's laugh was soft and bitter. Honor, Commander, you really don't understand what you're dealing with, do you? The alien's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of confusion among his people. You saved the lives of hegemony personnel. Medical logs confirm this. 17 wounded soldiers treated by your field hospital during the Battle of Kepler 3. I did save them, Taiho agreed, his voice taking on a clinical tone. Every single one. Sergeant Kothvel with the severed arm, Lieutenant Zemthor with a punctured lung cavity, Captain Velkris with neural trauma from a plasma burst. He paused. I studied each of them while I worked. Something cold crawled up Felthar's spine. Studied them. Your cardiovascular system operates at a much higher pressure than ours, Taiho said matter-of-factly. I learned that when Kothvel's severed artery sprayed ichor across my surgical station, the fluid came out with such force it nearly blinded my assistant. But I also noticed how quickly your blood coagulated when exposed to specific electromagnetic frequencies. The commander's breathing quickened. Outside the viewport, a hegemony medical frigate was docking with the station, its red cross markings stark against the black hole. How many of his people had been treated by doctors like this one? Lieutenant Zemthor taught me about your respiratory system, Taiho continued. Those gill slits aren't just for breathing, are they? They're pressure regulators. When I sealed his punctured lung, I had to account for the way your breathing affects your entire circulatory system. Fascinating adaptation for a species that evolved in high-pressure environments. Velthor realized his hands were trembling. You were helping them, saving their lives. I was learning how to end them more efficiently, Taiho replied. Every patient was a lesson in hegemony biology. Captain Velkris was particularly educational. Neural trauma meant I could study your brain chemistry while repairing the damage. Did you know your people have a cluster of nerves right behind your primary eyes that controls fear responses? Damage that cluster, and a hegemony soldier becomes utterly fearless. Damage it differently, and they become paralyzed by terror. Recording device hummed between them, capturing every word. Velthor wished he could turn it off, but the tribunal demanded complete documentation. The Hippocratic Oath, Taiho said, as if reading his thoughts. First, do no harm. It's the foundation of human medicine, sworn by doctors for thousands of years. But it doesn't say anything about gathering intelligence while you heal. It doesn't prohibit learning your enemy's weaknesses while saving their lives. He described his field hospital on Kepler 3, set up in the ruins of a bombed-out shopping complex. Human and hegemony wounded lying side by side, receiving equal treatment. To outside observers, it looked like the best of wartime cooperation. Two species, putting aside their differences to preserve life. I treated 43 hegemony soldiers over 6 months, Taiho said. Each one taught me something new. How your joints moved under stress. How your nervous system responded to pain. Which organs were vital and which were redundant. I kept detailed notes, supposedly for medical purposes. Velthor's secondary arms curled against his torso in a defensive posture. Those notes became the foundation for every biological weapon we developed afterward, Taiho finished. Sonic devices tuned to the exact frequency that would rupture your gill slits. Neurotoxins designed to target your specific brain chemistry. Pressure weapons, calibrated to exploit your cardiovascular weaknesses. The human leaned forward, his shackles clinking softly. By month 4, we had prototype weapons that could drop a hegemony soldier in seconds without leaving a mark. Neurological disruptors that would send your people into uncontrollable terror states. Atmospheric processors that could create gas. Mixtures breathable to humans but toxic to your respiratory system. A transport ship rumbled past the station, carrying supplies to the front lines. Velthor wondered how many of those supplies were medical equipment. How many human doctors were even now studying captured hegemony personnel under the guise of treatment. The siege of Firebase Delta, Taiho said quietly. Remember that? Forces held that position for 3 weeks against impossible odds. Brave soldiers, fighting to the last round of ammunition. But then the gas attack started, Velthor remembered. An entire battalion of elite troops found dead at their posts. Without visible wounds, no signs of struggle, no indication of what had killed them. If autopsies had been inconclusive. Compound 77, Taiho said. Colorless, odorless, completely harmless to human physiology. But it binds to the hemoglobin analog in hegemony. Blood, preventing oxygen transport. Your soldiers literally suffocated while breathing normally. They died at their posts, still trying to fire weapons with hands that no longer had the strength to pull triggers. The commander's vision blurred as stress hormones flooded his system. "You used medical knowledge to create that poison?" "I used knowledge gained from saving Sergeant Kothful's life," Taiho corrected. "His blood samples taught me everything I needed to know about hegemony oxygen transport. Compound was just applied chemistry based on medical research," he described. Other developments that had emerged from his field hospital. Pressure mines that exploited hegemony joint weaknesses learned from treating broken bones. Electromagnetic pulses calibrated to disrupt the nervous system frequencies he'd mapped while treating head injuries. Psychological warfare techniques based on fear response patterns observed during surgery. The worst part, Taiho said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, was how grateful your soldiers were. They thanked me for saving their lives. Some of them gave me little tokens of appreciation, pressed flowers from their home worlds, pictures of their families, traditional blessing stones. He reached into his detention uniform and somehow produced a small, carved stone that glowed with soft inner light. Velthar recognized it immediately, a hegemony gratitude token, given only to those who had shown extraordinary kindness. "Captain Velkris gave me this after I repaired his neural damage," Taiho said. "He told me I was proof that humans and hegemony could find common ground, that maybe peace was possible after all." The stone's light reflected in his eyes. 3 weeks later, weapons based on his brain scans killed 200 of his people at the Battle of Centauri Station. Velthor stared at the token, its gentle glow suddenly seeming sinister. "You kept it?" "I keep all of them," Taiho replied. 43 tokens from 43 soldiers whose trust I used to help kill their comrades. Some humans would call it guilt. I call it data collection." The commander reached for the recording device with shaking hands, needing to document this. Testimony, but terrified of what he might hear next. Outside, another medical frigate was approaching the station. Its hull gleaming white against the stars, Sergeant Onari entered the interrogation room like a shadow given form. She was smaller than the other prisoners, barely reaching Velthor's chest, but something about her presence made the massive chamber feel cramped. Her movements were precise, economical, like every step had been calculated for maximum efficiency. The commander had studied her file extensively, 412 confirmed eliminations, including 12 high-ranking hegemony officers. Velthar commanded, but his voice carried less authority than before. Nari complied without protest. Settling into the metal chair with fluid grace, her hands rested calmly in her lap, despite the energy shackles, and her dark eyes swept the room. Once before focusing on the commander, she wasn't looking at him the way other prisoners had. She was studying him, cataloging weaknesses, measuring distances. "Your service record is extensive," Velthar began, consulting his holographic display. The numbers glowed between them like accusations. 400 confirmed eliminations across 17 star systems. You've killed more hegemony personnel than entire human battle squadrons. Actually, it's 423 now, Nari corrected quietly. Your file is missing the kills from the Arcturus campaign. The commander's mandibles clicked in agitation. You hunt our officers like prey animals, stalking them for days, studying their routines, then striking without warning. This is not honorable warfare. Nari's expression didn't change. Humans are persistent predators, Commander. Do you know what that means? Revelter consulted his translator, but the concept didn't fully register. Editors hunt for sustenance, for territory, for resources. Most predators do, Nari agreed. A Regalian sandcat kills when it's hungry, then rests until hunger drives it to hunt again. A Centauri pack hunter takes down prey for the family group, then stops. But humans? She leaned forward slightly. We hunt because something in our DNA won't let us stop until the threat is completely eliminated. Through the viewport, a hegemony command cruiser was visible in the distance, its hull bristling with communication arrays and defensive systems. Velthar wondered how many officers aboard that ship had requested transfers after hearing about human snipers. General Korthal Velnari said, as if reading his thoughts, brilliant tactician, led the successful siege of 3 human colonies. Your high command considered him irreplaceable. Velthar remembered the general well, a war hero whose strategies had broken human resistance in the Outer Rim. His death had shocked the entire hegemony military. I studied him for 47 days, Nari continued. Not just his schedule, but his habits. The way he held his coffee cup in his left hand because of an old injury. How he always checked his personal communicator exactly 3 minutes into every briefing. The fact that he wore his deceased mate's memorial pin on his collar, positioned precisely over his primary heart. The commander felt his breathing grow shallow. You observed classified military briefings? I observed everything, Nari replied. His morning routine in his private quarters. His late-night walks through the command deck when he couldn't sleep. The way he paused at the observation lounge on Deck 7. Every day at 1400 hours to look at the stars and think about home, she described a level of surveillance that should have been impossible. Human infiltration of hegemony command structures. Intelligence gathering that penetrated the most secure military installations in the galaxy. But it wasn't about stealing secrets or gathering tactical information. The shot came during his daily observation period, Nari said. Single projectile fired from a cargo hauler 12 kilometers away. The round was custom-made, designed to penetrate hegemony body armor while leaving human equipment undamaged. It struck him precisely where his mate's memorial pin rested over his heart. Velthor's hands clenched involuntarily. You chose that location deliberately. The psychological impact was important, Nari confirmed. His staff found him collapsed against the observation window, that memorial pin driven into his chest cavity. Every officer who saw the scene understood the message. We knew him well enough to violate something sacred, personal, irreplaceable. The replacement commander, General Vextel, had lasted exactly 6 days. His death came during a routine inspection of forward positions, a perfect headshot from an impossible angle, while surrounded by an entire security detail. Vextel's successor made it 3 days, Nari continued. Admiral Kethman lasted 18 hours. After that, your high command started having difficulty finding volunteers for planetary command positions. She described the systematic dismantling of hegemony leadership structure through targeted eliminations. Each death was carefully planned not just for tactical impact, but for maximum psychological effect on surviving personnel. Lieutenant Colonel Zorval was particularly challenging, Nari said. Implemented extensive security protocols. Never. Followed the same route twice, varied his schedule randomly. Smart precautions that would have protected him from conventional assassination attempts. Velthar leaned forward despite himself. How did you adapt? I didn't hunt him, Nari replied. I hunted his daughter. Commander's blood ran cold. You killed a civilian child? I never touched her, Nari said calmly, but I made sure he knew I could. A toy left on her school desk with a note. A photo of her walking home, taken from the exact angle I would need for a clear shot. Her favorite stuffed animal moved from her bedroom to the family dining table while they slept. She described psychological warfare that went beyond military targets, creating terror that paralyzed decision-making at the highest levels of command. Zorvel requested immediate transfer to a rear area position, Nari continued. So did his replacement, and the next one. Eventually, your military started assigning commanders to planetary operations against their will, because no one would volunteer. The recording device hummed steadily, capturing testimony that redefined everything Velthor thought he knew about human warfare. But the real breakthrough came when we realized we didn't need to kill them at all, Nari said. Fear was more effective than death. A dead commander is replaced. A terrified commander makes mistakes that get entire battalions killed. She described phantom operations where human snipers would acquire target locks on hegemony officers, but not fire. Laser designators painting targets during briefings. Scope reflections visible to security details. Messages delivered to personal quarters detailing intimate knowledge of family members, daily routines, vulnerabilities. General Morkith commanded the siege of New Sol, Nari said. Brilliant strategist, perfect service record, absolutely. Unshakable under pressure. For 3 weeks, he coordinated the most successful hegemony offensive of the war. Velthor nodded. He remembered the reports of human resistance crumbling under Morkith's methodical advance. Then he found the photo, Nari continued. Taken from his personal quarters while he slept, showed him in bed, completely vulnerable, with crosshairs drawn over his head in red ink. But the terrifying part was what else was in the picture. She paused, letting the silence build tension. His newborn grandchild, sleeping in a crib beside his bed. The crosshairs were positioned so they covered both targets simultaneously. Veltor's secondary arms curled protectively against his torso. The infant was never threatened. The infant was never in danger, Nari corrected. But Morkith didn't know that. All he knew was that an enemy sniper had been close enough to kill his entire family while he dreamed peacefully. That the most secure command facility in hegemony space had been penetrated without triggering a single alarm. General Morkith had suffered a complete psychological breakdown within hours of finding that photograph. The siege of New Sol collapsed. As command structure imploded, that's when we realized the truth about warfare, Nari said quietly. The most effective weapon isn't the one that kills your enemy. It's the one that makes your enemy too afraid to fight. Commander Velthor sat alone in his quarters aboard Hegemony Station 7, staring at the holographic reports floating before him. The blue light cast strange shadows across his face as he read the testimonies for the third time. Outside his viewport, the wreckage of human destroyers still drifted against the star field, but somehow they looked different now. Not like the broken remnants of a defeated enemy, but like sleeping predators that might wake at any moment. His claws clicked. Against the metal desk in a nervous rhythm that had become constant over the past 3 days, the sound echoed in the small chamber, mixing with the hum of life support systems and the distant rumble of ship engines. 3 interviews, 3 humans. 3 completely different perspectives on the same terrifying truth. The first report detailed the siege of Outpost Gamma, where 30 humans had held off 2,000 hegemony troops for 43 days, not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but by transforming their entire environment into a weapon. They had turned mining equipment into instruments of war, children's songs into psychological torture, and their own deaths into tactical advantages. The second report chronicled Dr. Kim Tai-ho's field hospital, where the line between healing and harming had become impossibly blurred. Every act of mercy had been simultaneously an act of warfare, every saved life a step toward more efficient killing. The Hippocratic Oath, twisted into something monstrous while remaining technically pure. The third report documented Sergeant O. Nari's campaign of systematic terror, designed not just to eliminate enemy personnel, but to destroy the very concept of military leadership. Fear weaponized so effectively that hegemony officers would rather face court-martial than accept promotion to combat commands. Velthor activated his personal communicator and began Hajis, recording his final assessment for high command. The devices. Red light blinked steadily as he chose his words carefully. 3 days of interrogation have revealed fundamental misunderstandings about human warfare capabilities, he began, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. Previous tactical analyses assumed humans operated according to standard military doctrine. This assumption was catastrophically incorrect. He paused, watching a hegemony medical frigate docked with the station. How many wounded soldiers aboard? That ship had been treated by human medics. How many had unknowingly provided biological intelligence to their enemies while receiving life-saving care? Humans do not separate warfare from existence, he continued. They do not possess distinct military and civilian mindsets. When threatened, their entire species transforms into a weapon system. Medical knowledge becomes ammunition. Industrial equipment becomes artillery. Children become psychological warfare assets. It's not through deliberate militarization, but through the simple act of continuing to exist while under siege. The commander stood and walked to his viewport, looking out at the debris field. A human transport ship had been cut in half by plasma fire, its hull split open like a broken egg. But even in death it seemed to mock him. How many escape pods had launched from that wreck? How many human survivors were even now being processed through hegemony detention facilities, carrying with them the same adaptive lethality he'd witnessed in his interviews? Traditional warfare assumes rational actors pursuing achievable objectives. Velthar continued recording. Territory, resources, political control, strategic advantage. Human warfare serves only one objective: survival. They will sacrifice everything, including their own moral foundations, to ensure their species continues to exist. A memory surfaced from his own combat experience during the siege of New Byzantium. He'd cornered a group of human civilians in a damaged residential complex, expecting standard surrender protocols. Instead, the humans had calmly explained that they'd rigged the entire building with explosives, not as a threat, but as a simple statement of fact. They would rather die than be captured, and they would take as many hegemony soldiers with them as possible. At the time, he dismissed it as fanaticism. Now he understood it was something far more dangerous: pragmatism. Analysis of human psychological profiles reveals a species that views defeat as temporary setback rather than permanent conclusion, he recorded. They do not accept loss as final. Every defeat becomes intelligence gathering for future victory. Every prisoner becomes a potential intelligence asset. Every act of mercy toward them becomes a tactical error. The door chimed, and Velthorsa entered with another stack of interrogation requests. Hundreds of human prisoners were being processed through the station, each one a potential source of intelligence about human capabilities. But after 3 days of interviews, the commander no longer saw them as prisoners. He saw them as students, observing their captors, learning hegemony weaknesses, preparing for the next phase of conflict. Recommendation: immediate cessation of hostilities with human forces, Velthor dictated, his voice growing more urgent. This conflict cannot be won through conventional military means. Humans do not wage war, they become war. Every virtue they possess transforms into a weapon. Every weakness becomes a strength. They are not conquering territory or seeking resources. They are ensuring their own survival by making survival impossible for their enemies. He thought about Lee Myra's quiet certainty, Dr. Kim Tai-ho's clinical detachment, Sergeant Oneris' predatory patience. 3 individuals who embodied their species' terrifying adaptability. They weren't monsters or fanatics. They were humans doing what humans do, surviving at any cost. Personal observation, Velthar added, his voice dropping too barely above. A whisper. We can destroy human ships, occupy human worlds, kill human soldiers. But we cannot defeat the human spirit because it refuses to be anything other than completely, utterly human. They will not become like us. They will not accept our rules. They will not surrender their essential nature for the sake of peace. The recording device continued humming as he stared out at the stars. Somewhere in that vast darkness, human colonies were preparing for the next phase of conflict. Human engineers were adapting civilian technology for military purposes. Human doctors were studying captured hegemony biological samples. Human snipers were calculating impossible shots against targets they'd never seen. The war must end now, Velthar concluded, because every day it continues, they become more dangerous. Not through technological advancement or military buildup, but through simple adaptation. They are learning us faster than we are learning them. They're becoming more human while we become more afraid. He transmitted the report to High Command, then sat back in his chair. Through the viewport, he could see human prisoners being transferred between detention facilities. They moved with calm resignation, but their eyes were always watching, always analyzing, always preparing. 3 days later, the Hegemony High Command issued a galaxy-wide ceasefire order. The war with humanity was officially over. But as Velthar watched the last human transport disappear into hyperspace, he knew this wasn't an ending. It was just the beginning of humanity's next adaptation. The Eon de Triclode can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.